Okay, it's a video for the latest and greatest Chi-Fi planar earphones in the world. The TANGZU WU HEYDAY Edition. A collaboration with me. There's my logo right there. If you don't get the joke of what I just did, Wu-Tang used to walk around with championship belts. WWF or WWE or others, and it was just kind of a fun gag back then. That's why I just did that, if you don't get it. Moving right along. Let me hold this in my hand. Let's look at the frequency graph. Notable for two reasons. I might forget the second, but I definitely stick with the first one. The 7 Hz timeless was notable at its time because all of the other sets that were available were so odd in their tuning and in a graph, they immediately turned people off. The 7 Hz timeless is an excellent tuning, but compared to what was going on at the time, it looked good. It looked like people could put up with that, maybe a little bit of extra energy here and there, because it had actual bass and mid-bass and mids, and there wasn't anything weird going on. So the timeless jumped ahead of the pack just by tuning, just by looking like it actually had been tuned. Now, fast forward 6 months to a year later, and we are doing planars in a way that is virtually identical to dynamic drivers. My graph is really based on my background graph. This is the old one, which this was based on when I was tuning it. How I would like the sub-bass and mid-bass and mids of a set of transducers. Dynamic driver really is what this is based on. What I would like it to do, because that type of tuning makes me feel good and it plays back my library well. Planars can be done in basically the same way. The sub-bass, the mid-bass, and the mids is a very nice glide into the mids. It does have elevated bass that looks to be about 6 or 7 dB over the mids, let's say 500 Hertz. And then it's got an ear gain starting at 1 kilohertz. It's very, very gradual, and it's exactly matching my target. And then we get to the upper mids, and you've got a couple elevations and slight dips, which is very common for the area, very similar to a lot of dynamic drivers. You've got a little bit of extra energy to 8 kilohertz. How much of that is actually that, and how much is related to the resonance from the 711 couplers? You got to do a sine sweep to really pick it up. I did. It murders my ears. I don't hear any extra energy there. That's partly a relic, actually. Then you've got a drop off that's not too precipitous at all. It's actually about exactly 5 dB below the mids, as this is an amplitude scale, and then it rises up again. And so you've got no roll off. You've got no boosted up ear gain that might cause shout. You've got no too much upper mids that might create a sense of the second, third, fourth, fifth order harmonics being a little too intense for you. You've got no suck out anywhere that's going to cause maybe a wobble or an odd replay for something like vocals. It's got no exceptionally big boost after 10K, which might take, and well, actually definitely takes harmonics and boosts them to a unnatural. Remember, the fundamental region, harmonics, these die off. Like every sound has an apex and then basically a death, a birth, a life, and a death. When the death is louder than the life and the birth, it's kind of weird. You understand what I'm saying? This doesn't have any of those things. It doesn't have a tuck. It doesn't have too much sub-bass and mid-bass. This is even something that I think, I'm sending this to Super Reviews because he's not a big fan of too much bass. This should be something more aligned with what he likes, or at least the bass isn't going to overwhelm the rest of the replay. And the rest is to taste, and other reviewers the same. I'm sending this out to lots of people. That's the graph. And I had 2 points. Oh, the second point is it's a good graph. That's right. Now, taking a look at the box, if you want to skip, you can check the chapters below and go ahead and look at whatever the next chapter is and skip to that. This is so people who want to get a look at it before they buy it, because you're buying the whole thing. They want to see that. So starting now. Cut it off. Put it up. Hey, there's my logo. Okay, pause. Love this case. This is a case that first came out with the like this type of case was a Yanyan Moonlight, I believe, and I loved it immediately. Sent a mail to a seller and said, man, that case is dope. You guys should sell that separately, or you should use that more because it completely protects the shells and you can wrap the wires around it. And this is a better design than a lot of companies that sell $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 IMs. I'm not complaining about it. Yes, I am. More work could be put into that. For example, those pucks that come with Empire ears, where you stick everything in there and you wrap them in the little booties, and I would much prefer something like this for my EEs or for anything expensive, because if it's effective. It does its job to protect what's inside it and not have the terminations rubbing up against the shells, be it resin or metal. I don't care. I want these protected. When this is closed, they are. Now, when you open this up, if you buy this, stuck back here is going to be the cable. And by the magic of such ghetto editing, it's not actually ghetto editing, it's just turning over here. This is what the cable looks like. It is a very, very nice and a very manageable set. I'm always able to just wrap it back up to the way it was. It is a type of cable that is becoming very, very common recently, which is a good thing, because that means you don't need to pay attention to which cable you selected if you get this type, because it's going to come with a 3.5, a 4.4, and 2.5, and that should really probably pretty much have you covered. It's a 2-pin on the bud, which is right here. It is a flush 2-pin, so there's no extra extruding part right here that some people find just to be annoying and unnecessary. This doesn't have this. When this sits inside, it sits flush. I'm not sure if I'm doing left and right correct right now, but just so you can see it, that's what it looks like. There's no gap in between the IEM and also the barrel of the termination point. So the cable is quite nice, and it's got you covered when it comes to whatever you're using, or you want to switch into something else. The shell of the set, you can see that it's still sitting in there. If anybody can tell me what that says, I'll pin your comment. What does that say? I have no idea. Is that my name in Chinese? That would be pretty dope. Go ahead and say it, and then I'll pin it if you can mention it. And that's how they're well protected in foam. Underneath, you're going to find balanced ear tips, small, medium, large, base enhanced ear tips, small, medium, large, and a single pair of foams, which look large to the eye but are probably medium. So that's what comes inside there. The shell is made out of metal. What's the point of that? If I could pick one or the other, I would always pick metal, because I'm a believer that the reflections inside for open non-tube drivers are better, they're faster with a metal shell than they are with plastics. Plastics can cause a sense of blunting or a time incorrection that is hard to explain without taking a whole video to do it. Just if I was said, we can put it in an aluminum shell or we can put it in a plastic shell, I'd say, do the aluminum. Do that. I think it works better. Okay, so about music replay, starting on the left side of the graph, the sub bass. Before we continue, if you have a sound on your right side, if you're using headphones or earphones, there's imagine that you're in Japan in a living room, it's super cold, and there's a fan heater on the right side, because that's what's actually happening. It's super cold. And that should be left side. So we got nice mics going on, but you might pick up some stuff. I apologize in advance for that. In the sub bass, we have a set that replays stuff like Pack Like Sardines in a Crushed In Box, Tupac Violent, Kill Jill by Big Boy, Angel by Massive Attack, deck mixed, low frequency events. It can have a lot of droning, a lot of extension, stuff that other instruments don't really do, but the deck mix stuff does. This does well. I tuned this and the adjustment from the original using my library and the stuff that I always do, and found that it had a slightly better overall replay. Remember, we're taking a V kind of, and we're pulling it down on both ends. We're pulling it down by a couple dB in the upper mids and also in the bass, because it makes what is supposed to be a better driver more able to play back what's in the production without any interference or maybe a little bit too much bass or a little bit too much treble. Tone that down and let your ears hear. And that was kind of what the goal was with this. Copying it was not an option. Adding more bass was definitely not an option, and I'm not going to put more treble on the original. So that's how that came about. But in the low end, it does quite well. As we move into bass guitar, into the mid bass, Sultans of Swing, Black Sabbath, Violent Femmes, we get to a track that highlights the kind of the benefits of a planar set. Dynamic drivers or dynamic driver hybrids with a busy track like what you might be looking at right now, a video of a drummer and a bassist going on at the same time, the possibility of masking is very high, where two things are happening at the same place on a frequency graph at the same time by two different instruments. One is going to dominate audibly over the other. Shouldn't really happen, but that's what happens when a dynamic driver is tasked with too much information. Planars seem to do it just a little bit better. Going all the way back to my Tin Hi-Fi P1 video, I didn't like really anything else about it, but that was notable and it stood out to me. The planars do that stuff really well. They take stuff that is busy for dynamic drivers and other combos and make it less so. Make it sound a little more authentic. It did really well with the Black Sabbath track. I think it did better than the original Wu because there was less power and low energy noise going on, and I was better able to focus on the bassist and the drummer, and also the properties of the driver made that easier as well, and I enjoyed it. So I think the mid bass was excellent in a very difficult track for almost everything that's not a planar. As we get to Sultans of Swing, I'm listening for a bassist that is a clear indication of too much or not enough mid bass. He's too forward and seems to be crowding out Mark Knopfler's his iconic guitar, or he seems to be just part of the mix where he's actually supposed to be pinning down the track, which means that he's supposed to be notable and not in the way, kind of in a balance. I think that the Heyday nails that. The tuning of this set, if we take one single track and say that that had the most influence on it, this is the track. It's called Sultans of Swing. I wanted the bassist, the pulls, and the snappy releases to sound authentic. I didn't want it to be as potent as the original. I wanted it to be more something like a monitor, but with accurate low-end replay. And this was the song that really I came to the conclusion of what bass I wanted on it, and it was just a little bit less than the original. So if any track could be cited as being influential in the tuning of the set, it was this one right here. A couple Fleetwood Mac tracks as well related to harmonics, but this really was the big player. I think the mid bass is done very well on this. As we move to the drums and we get to Led Zeppelin, or actually John Bonham and Neil Peart, the drum, like the bass, sounds accurate. It doesn't sound subdued. It doesn't sound blunted, or some of the traits that people can put on it. I think it sounded good. Usually when bass guitar sounds good, drums usually do as well. A difference might be the Monarch Mark II, where bass guitar sounded pretty good, not ideal for me, but the kick drum was notable in it, still not being quite what I wanted. So, but most of the time bass guitar and drums will come along together as sounding ideal to this reviewer or not, and I think the bass guitar sounds fine, and the drums do as well. As we get into vocals, Fleetwood Mac is a big influence for me because it's got two male, two female singers. It's a vocal-centric album and it's well produced. I think that the replay of Never Going Back Again, The Chain, Gold Dust Woman, I think they all sounded excellent. I think this is where I became convinced of what the company was saying, that it was a better driver, was in fact true, because the combination of the less V-shaped tuning and the claimed better spec driver as far as distortion actually seemed to play out here. I thought that the vocals, the sweetness of Stevie Nicks really came out well on this set, whereas it came out a little more potent on the original. And on a lot of sets that got elevated bass, I thought that this struck a very good balance of giving male vocals the meat on the bone, not husk, but sounding accurate, and also not messing up with female vocals. I'm going to repeat this again. Female vocals seem to have very little flexibility with the mid bass. If you, it's either sounds like it's done well or it doesn't. That's related to upper mids as well. The gap between my opinion and others is a lot of time down to library. A lot of them listen to J-pop, K-pop, or female-centric libraries. Mine is less so. So when they'd say something doesn't sound good with female vocals, I would go back and refer to the Fleetwood Mac Rumors album and think, I can get it. I'm okay with it, but I can get the point that they're making. And also it makes me feel comfortable that they're actually listening to music, because sometimes when I watch stuff, I'm not sure because stuff doesn't make sense. I'm giving a shout out to a particular reviewer right now, but I won't mention out loud. But he was correct about certain points that I later looked at, listened to, and thought, yeah, I can get where that's coming from. I think vocals sound excellent on this. I think that strings for Vivaldi sound brilliant. If you are a classical junkie and you like classical music, you're going to get enough low frequency energy for that part of the orchestra, but you're not going to get so much harmonics that it's going to fatigue or leave you with a ringing sensation, which that upper mid, not so much upper mid, the treble region being boosted over the upper mids is really something that I've discovered through the Gaia and through the Stellaris and through other sets, that I just can't. I can't do that. I can't listen for long periods of time. I can't enjoy that because I can't do that. It's not a set that I can really recommend to other people because I wouldn't listen to it myself. This set isn't tuned like that, doesn't play back like that, does strings what to my ears are accurate. Everything I say is obviously my opinion, and to my ears, I like the way that this plays hip-hop. I like the way it plays rock and roll. I think that it plays Vivaldi, Verdi, Tchaikovsky very well. It's my favorite planar. 2 points about that. There's bias. I was directly involved with the tuning of it and the adjustments and the several samples, that one that's sitting on the table, coming back and forth, trying it with slightly subdued treble by 1 dB, 2 dB, and leaving the bass as it was. It sounded what that might sound like to you, more bass dominant and less clear with the vocals. Okay, go with the other way. Boost the treble and pull the bass down a little bit. That sounded too intense, and I think planars sometimes don't handle that high energy well. Well, how about take down the treble a couple dB and pull down the bass? And this is where we came to an agreement. I think we both wanted the same thing from the beginning, but there was miscommunication going on. I'm the bad guy, I love bass. Okay, we're gonna do this, and no, I want clean replay. If it's a better driver, the tuning's nice, let's tweak it in a way. More treble is not gonna work. More bass is not gonna work. Both of those is definitely not going to work because that's a V. How about we pull both sides down a little bit and let the driver express? It's got enough bass in its tuning that we decided on. It's got clean mids. It's got nice treble. It's got proper extension. It supposedly has a better driver. It sounds like it to my ear. Let's let the driver do its job without being overly tasked with one thing or the other. Worked out excellent. It's a set that I highly recommend. From the beginning to the end process, this has been the most enjoyable of all. The company TANGZU is sharing everything with everybody to the point where is it a 14.2 or 14.5? I think that's typos on some people's parts. There's no stuff going on. You're either being completely transparent or you're not. They're being completely transparent with everything to the point where people are picking stuff and saying, that looks like the same trace as the other one. And then other people will come in like myself or others that are in the hobby and say, most all of these drivers and every planar that you've heard is coming from the same source. So they should look pretty much the same. I think KZ is in fact making their own drivers. So that's, I'll take that back. But most of the S12, the 7 Hertz, the Dunu, all of those are using the Ear Studio or a variety of the same driver. It's like dynamic drivers that use a CNT diaphragm, but they're maybe using a different magnet and a shell. And you look at it visually and you think that's a different driver, when in fact, essentially the voice coil and the diaphragm, the magnet, they're the same driver, they just look different because of reasons. But I'm going off the rails. Excellent planar. To this date, the 17th of December 2022. I think it's the best. I'll let you decide for yourself. Watch other reviews. It certainly doesn't have too much bass. It doesn't have too much treble. It's not lacking. It doesn't have any crevasses. It doesn't have any spikes. It's built well. It's got a metal shell. It's got a premium cable. It's got the changeable terminations. It's got a wonderful case to store it in. It's checking all the boxes. I want to say thank you to TANGZU for being excellent to work with. You never pushed back. You just asked. I made a point. You asked to clarify. You never made this difficult, as it sometimes can be. I had an image. You just wanted to get what it was, and once you got it, you executed it perfectly. I appreciate the transparency that you're trying to give everybody. It's good for you as a company from here forward. Whatever happens, there'll be good moments and bad moments, but when you share everything that you can with everybody, instead of making giant apology letters because you didn't do that, and a lot of people came to conclusions and found out that things that were said weren't the case, that's a bad way to go. You guys are completely going in the good direction. If it's something you can share, which is almost everything, go ahead. It's going to come out eventually. Hi Fry and other people are going to crack stuff open and take a close look at it. Get ahead of the wave and just say, this is what it is, this is what we did, and this is how much it costs, and then back up. And that's pretty much what you're doing right now. So bravo to you. Thank you. You guys have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Don't know why I just said it, because I'll definitely do a video before the New Year, but I'm out. That's a weird way to end the video. Please buy TANGZU WU Heyday Edition. The world